I'm a Christian, a patriotic American, and a free market, shrink the government conservative, who also happens to be gay.
I hate to burst your bubble, but logic dictates that you really can't be all of those things. Oh boy, PragerU. What do I say about PragerU? Well, they make some good videos, and they have a tendency to oversimplify complex issues, sometimes resulting in very serious errors, and then sometimes, like today, they're just flat out wrong from beginning to end.
What I mean by that is, my values define me.
You say that your values define you, but you've already given us two mutually contradictory sets of values. On the one hand, there's the Christian value set, which include the seventh commandment of thou shalt not commit adultery. And then on the other hand, there is the gay value set, which promotes an extreme form of adultery called homosexuality. Now, you have to choose. You can't have both of these values at once, because one of them says that adultery is wrong, and the other one says that what the first one means by adultery is right. Now, where would I get this idea that Christianity is inherently opposed to homosexuality? Am I just this prejudiced, evil person who just wants to hate on the gays? No, I've got this idea because I can read. Anyone who can read and is honest will reach basically the same conclusion on this, because it is not a debatable issue. It is a matter of fact. The definition of a Christian comes from the Apostles' Creed, which includes the phrase, the forgiveness of sins, which means that the Apostles' Creed entails believing in the existence of sin. And it gets its sense of the term sin from the law laid out in the Bible. I have heard a surprisingly large number of people say they think the Bible has no problem with homosexuality. Now, think what you will about whether the Bible is right or not, but for the sake of honesty, we must recognize the fact that it does in fact say what it says. The Bible addresses homosexuality specifically in 4 places and condemns it all 4 times. These are Leviticus chapter 20 verse 13, Romans chapter 1 verse 27, 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 10, and 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9. Now, in Leviticus, it even says that the Israelites should put homosexual offenders to death. Under New Covenant theology, Christians do not believe in practicing the Levitical law, putting homosexuals or other adulterous offenders to death, based on what Jesus said in John chapter 8, verse 11. But that does not change the fact that what's sin is sin. If you believe Christianity to be wrong on these points, then make your decisions about your religious affiliations or lack thereof accordingly. But let's not pretend that Christianity or the Bible are somehow okay with homosexuality. They're not. It's a fact. I am not open to debate on this point because I believe that people can read. There are some parts of the Bible that are complex, with subtlety and nuance. This is not one of them. It is very, 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 very clear. I must acknowledge that there exist some Bible scholars who will dispute the meaning of these passages. However, there are no credible Bible scholars who dispute the obvious meaning of these passages. And any who do are liars, not mistaken, not misguided, intentional liars. And they, if they do not repent, are going to hell. literally going to hell for being liars if they do not repent of telling this lie. These so-called scholars need to get down on their knees right now and beg God for forgiveness for telling this lie, because they know that the text says what it says. If you do not believe that homosexual sex acts are sin, as the Bible clearly says that they are, then you do not believe in sin. And if you do not believe in sin, then you do not believe in the doctrines in the Apostles' Creed. And if you do not profess the doctrines in the Apostles' Creed, then you are not a Christian by the most ancient, broadest definition, which applies to all Christians, whether Catholic or Protestant. Even for Latter-day Saints, the Apostles' Creed is so ancient that it predates the Great Apostasy. There's really no excuse here. You may be a reasonably good person and a good citizen who has some good values, but you are not specifically Christian. You may be a fan of Jesus or of Christianity. You think that it has some good things in it, but you don't fully subscribe to Christian morality. That's okay. We can use some Jesus fans, certainly better than being an atheist gay activist. However, there's a considerable difference between being a fan and being on the team. You can't let the fans call the plays. That's not how you win. People who are on the team show up for practice. They're actually helping the team win. But if you're only a fan, you aren't even playing. Now, some Christians play badly. There are a lot of bad Christians. And some fans might be better than some of the players some of the time. But the difference is they're not actually playing. You're not trying to avoid sin. There's a big difference between being a Christian and therefore trying to avoid sin and not being a Christian and just happening to not sin as much. No matter how good you are, you're never going to be on the team until you're playing the same game, which means following the rules, or at least trying to follow the rules. You, sir, are not even trying to follow the rules. You are not a Christian, period.
Some unimaginative leftists like to claim that this qualifies me as a self-hating gay person.
Okay, self-hating, I'm not claiming that. That's a little bit off in leftist crazyland. But you are self-contradictory.
This is so boring. That intellectual laziness only underscores my point. Far too often, people are sorted by their gender.
What's wrong with sorting people by gender? I tell you what, I don't trust teenage boys to share showering facilities with teenage girls. That would lead to problems.
Or their skin color, or their sexual orientation, or any other immutable characteristic that has nothing to do with ideas or values.
For Christians, the Bible defines homosexuality as a sin, and defines most sins as forgivable, including this one. And whatever is forgivable is therefore mutable. So, logically, Christianity entails the doctrine that homosexuality is mutable. You can mute it. It's just very hard to do, like any sin. Having already discussed why you are not a Christian, I will now segue into why you are also not a conservative.
Just like any conservative, I want taxes low, the military strong, and don't even get me started on single-payer healthcare or late-term abortion. I'm a conservative because when I think about these issues critically, I usually end up on the right end of the spectrum. It's that simple.
Okay, your opposition to late-term abortion shows that you do have some ethics, which is good. But other than that, which of these values are really conservative values? They may be called conservative in American politics due to the accident called the modern Republican Party, but in terms of political philosophy, these aren't really conservative values. And by saying they aren't conservative, I don't mean that they're bad or that I disagree with them. I mean that they are liberal. I'd say that they are liberal because they are about giving people freedom, and in political philosophy, giving people freedom is the liberal ideal, and not the conservative ideal. The conservative ideal, in contrast, is about conserving those things which are good from the past. What is it that so-called gay conservatives are trying to conserve from the past? I don't think they really are conservatives, because they certainly aren't trying to conserve the things that matter the most, like Christianity and the family and public decency. Gay Republicans aren't conservatives. They're straight out of Brave New World, the novel by Aldous Huxley. Pro-capitalist, pro-hedonist, sexually libertine, and completely soulless.
Here's the thing. I fully recognize how fortunate I am to live in a time and a country where I can be openly gay and live a normal life. And that's in large part thanks to the hard work of gay rights activists who've paved the way for people like me.
Yeah, no. Any claims you had of being any kind of conservatism just went up in smoke. You, sir, are a neo-Marxist infiltrator. We have already discussed conservatism and liberalism as political philosophies, but these remarks show that this guy's core ideology is neither conservatism nor liberalism, but is instead a third view, progressivism. Progressivism is the opposite of conservatism, and it holds that we should cast off the past to instead embrace a new socio-political ideal.
But it's a new era now.
This is the core of what makes conservatism conservative, that it is anti-progressive. And progressivism is progressive because it is anti-conservative. Activists are protesters by definition. What were these gay rights activists that this guy was so grateful to?
I am genuinely grateful to them.
Protesting against? Nothing other than Christianity and real conservatism. This guy is not a conservative. He's an anti-conservative progressivist.
Why ostracize members of our community who don't toe the left-wing political line?
Because you do toe the left-wing political line on the core of leftist political philosophy, which is the myth of progress.
Now, does that mean that we all support every element of the party's platform? Absolutely not. In fact, I know that many conservatives, including some here at PragerU, don't see eye to eye with me on all of these questions. And yet, here I am, making a PragerU video, which perfectly illustrates another really important point.
It perfectly illustrates Conquest's second law of politics. Any organization not explicitly right-wing, sooner or later becomes left-wing.
To paraphrase my co-author and friend Mary Catherine Ham, we didn't get liberated in order to be told by liberal activists precisely what we're allowed to think, or how we must vote.
You see, you think you got liberated. That is an exclusively leftist perspective. I might propose a principle here, which I might call MacLean's Law of Political Philosophy, which would go as follows. What you think about sex and what you think about history form the core of any political ideology.
A free-thinking, free citizen of a free country is not obliged to believe anything because someone else believes he or she ought to think, or ought to vote, or ought to rank his or her priorities a certain way.
Look, not only is he a progressivist, he's a moral relativist, because he's saying we have no real moral obligations. Dennis Prager, why are you promoting moral relativism? He did seem to have at least some ethics earlier when he said he was against late-term abortion, but I begin to wonder now how long that idea would survive if we once started to question its ethical or meta-ethical foundations.
Like I said, I'm a Christian, a patriotic American, and a free market, shrink-the-government conservative who happens to be gay. That's how I choose to rank my priorities.
I think that fundamentally, this guy's problem is the same problem that atheists have. The problem with atheism isn't so much I think that God does not exist because line of reasoning. That part, there are some philosophical problems with it, but it's not the real problem. It's a rationalization. The real problem is I'm an atheist because I don't want anyone telling me what to do, underlying motivation and attitude. That's the real problem with atheism. And that's the real problem with these so-called gay conservative Christians. They don't want anyone telling them what to do, and that includes God. They are progressives who are trying to progress beyond God and God's laws.
You know what that's called? It's called progress.
Exactly. And that's the problem. You're not a conservative, you're a progressivist.